The ship descended through the pale orange clouds of Thesan Prime, carrying the weight of an entire species on board. Ambassador Elena Vasquez sat alone in the passenger cabin, her eyes fixed on the data tablet in her hands, reviewing the same information she had studied 1,000 times before she was 43 years old. A former military intelligence officer who had spent 20 years reading patterns in chaos, and everything she had learned in those years told her that something terrible was coming. The Galactic Concord Senate had existed for over 12,000 years, a gathering of the eldest and most powerful civilizations in the known galaxy. Humanity had received an invitation to join only 6 years ago, a gesture that most species considered generous given how young humans were to interstellar travel. Elena remembered the day Earth received that invitation, the celebrations, the hope, the belief that humanity had finally found its place among the stars. She also remembered the subtle condescension in every interaction since then. The way elder species spoke to human diplomats like adults, humoring curious children. The shuttle landed on a platform of white crystal that seemed to float above an endless city. Thesan Prime was beautiful in a cold and ancient way. Its towers built by beings who had mastered architecture when humans were still living in caves. A protocol officer from the Valkyrie delegation met her at the landing pad. He was tall and thin, his body covered in softly glowing tendrils that shifted colors as he moved. His name was impossible for human vocal cords to pronounce, so he had offered a simplified version. Counselor Veth, Ambassador Vasquez, he said, his voice carrying a musical quality that was pleasant but distant. The Senate is prepared to hear humanity's address. I trust your journey was comfortable. It was fine, Elena replied, keeping her tone neutral. Thank you for the escort. They walked through corridors of living crystal that hummed with energy older than human civilization. Elena had seen wonders since humanity joined the galactic community, but she had never allowed herself to be distracted by them. Wonder was a luxury, and she had work to do. The Senate chamber was a dome of transparent material that showed the swirling sky above. 47 delegations sat in tiered sections arranged in a perfect circle, each position reflecting thousands of years of political tradition. The human section was small, positioned near the back, a clear message about where humanity stood in the hierarchy. Elena took her place and waited. The chamber filled slowly as delegates arrived, many of them glancing at her with expressions she had learned to read. Curiosity mixed with dismissal, interest tinged with superiority. The High Speaker of the Valkyrie called the session to order. His name was Althan Voss, and he had led the Senate for 3 centuries, his bioluminescent form pulsing with authority as he spoke. We recognize the delegation from Earth, he announced. Ambassador Vasquez has requested time to address the Senate on a matter she describes as urgent. The floor is yours, Ambassador. Elena stood and walked to the central speaking platform. She felt the eyes of ancient beings upon her, creatures who had watched empires rise and fall, who had seen stars born and die, who considered humanity barely worthy of notice. She activated her data display, and holographic images filled the air above her. 6 months ago, she began, her voice steady and clear. Human monitoring stations on the galactic rim detected unusual readings. At first, our scientists believed it was sensor malfunction or natural phenomena. But the patterns continued, and they began to form a picture. She gestured, and the display showed a map of the galaxy's edge, with red markers indicating detection points. Something is moving in the void between galaxies. The signatures do not match any known species in Concord records. They do not match any natural phenomenon we have documented. And they are heading toward inhabited space. Murmurs rippled through the chamber. Elena waited for them to quiet before continuing. Our analysis suggests a fleet of considerable size, moving at speeds that indicate advanced propulsion technology. Based on current trajectory, They will reach the outer territories within 18 months. She paused, looking across the assembled delegates. I am here to request resources for a joint defense initiative. Humanity is willing to share all of our data and to contribute our own military assets to this effort. But we cannot face this threat alone. And neither can any single species. The chamber was silent for a long moment. Then the High Speaker inclined his head. The Senate thanks Ambassador Vasquez for her presentation. We will schedule a vote on her proposal for the next session. Delegates are invited to review the submitted data and prepare their positions. Elena nodded and returned to her seat. She had done what she came to do, presented the evidence as clearly as she could, and now she could only wait. But as she sat down, she noticed something that made her stomach tighten. The Dravoshi ambassador, a massive insectoid with compound eyes that reflected the chamber lights, was leaning toward the Thesan delegate beside him, and both were making gestures that Elena had learned to recognize as laughter. She saw similar reactions around the chamber. Subtle movements, quiet exchanges, the body language of amusement poorly hidden. They were not taking her seriously. She realized, not even pretending to consider her warning, Elena kept her face calm. She had expected resistance, skepticism, even dismissal. But she had hoped that the evidence would speak for itself, that beings who had survived for millennia would recognize a genuine threat when they saw one. She returned to her quarters that evening and sat alone in the dim light, reviewing her presentation again, searching for flaws in her argument, wondering if there was something she had missed. Her assistant, a young man named David Chun, brought her tea and asked if the session had gone well. They listened, Elena said. Which was not quite a lie. That is good, David replied. Listening is the first step. Elena nodded but said nothing. She had seen the laughter, and she knew what it meant. The Senate had not listened at all, and she feared that by the time they did, it would be far too late. She stayed awake late into the night, watching the alien stars through her window, thinking about Earth and everyone she had left behind. They were counting on her to protect them, to convince these ancient powers that humanity deserved to be heard. She would try again tomorrow. She would present more evidence, answer every question, address every doubt. She would do everything in her power to make them understand. But deep in her heart, a cold certainty was growing. They would not listen because they did not believe humans had anything worth saying. And no amount of evidence would change minds that had been closed for thousands of years. Elena Vasquez sat in the darkness of an alien world, carrying a warning that could save billions of lives, and wondered if anyone would ever take her seriously. The next morning came too quickly, and Elena walked through the crystal corridors with a heavy feeling in her chest. She had slept poorly, her dreams filled with darkness and movement. Shapes she could not quite see pressing against the edges of her vision. David walked beside her, carrying additional data files they had prepared overnight. He was young and still believed that truth and evidence could change minds, and Elena did not have the heart to tell him otherwise. The Senate chamber was fuller than the day before. Word had spread about the human ambassador and her warning, and it seemed that many delegates wanted to witness what happened next. Elena noticed that several species who rarely attended sessions were now present. Their attention fixed on the central platform, she took her seat and waited for the High Speaker to call the session to order. Around her, she could hear the quiet sounds of alien conversation, clicks and hums and whistles that her translator struggled to interpret. The tone was clear enough without translation. They were amused. High Speaker Althan Vos raised one glowing tendril, and the chamber fell silent. We continue yesterday's discussion regarding the human delegation's proposal, he announced. Delegates who wish to speak may signal their intention. The Dravoshi ambassador rose immediately. His name was Crixtal, and he was considered one of the most influential voices in the Senate. His species had been traveling between stars when humans were still discovering fire. And he carried that history in every movement of his massive insectoid body. I have reviewed the human data, Crichton began. His voice a series of clicks that the translator rendered into flat words. And I must share my concerns with this assembly. He turned toward Elena, his compound eyes reflecting her image 1,000 times. The humans have been part of our community for 6 years. In that time, they have contributed little of value while constantly demanding attention and resources. Now they come to us with sensor readings they claim show an invasion force, and they ask us to mobilize our fleets based on their interpretation. He made a gesture that Elena recognized as dismissive contempt. I've consulted with our own scientists, beings who have studied the void for longer than humanity has existed. They tell me that what the humans detected is most likely a natural phenomenon, perhaps gravitational waves from a distant collision or electromagnetic echoes from the galaxy's formation. Laughter rippled through the chamber, soft but unmistakable. The humans see shadows in the darkness and cry for their mothers. Crichton continued, "This is not surprising. They are a young species, barely removed from their primitive past. Their pattern recognition evolved to spot predators in tall grass. And now they see predators everywhere they look." More laughter, louder this time. Elena felt her face grow warm but kept her expression neutral. The Thesan delegate rose next. A being of flowing silver liquid contained in a humanoid shape. "I must echo Ambassador Crichton's concerns," the Thesan said. "Humanity has shown a tendency toward fear and aggression throughout their short history. They nearly destroyed themselves with nuclear weapons within living memory of their own citizens. Is it any wonder they see threats where none exist?" Elena's hands tightened on her data tablet, but she remained silent. The Marine delegate spoke next. "A collective intelligence that manifested as a swarm of tiny organisms moving in perfect coordination. We question whether humans can even interpret sensor data correctly," the swarm voice said. "Their technology is primitive by our standards. Their instruments may simply be malfunctioning, and they lack the experience to recognize this. Perhaps," another delegate added, "their pattern recognition is merely an overactive prey instinct, a relic of their evolutionary past as frightened animals on their death world." The laughter was open now, spreading through the chamber like a wave. Elena saw delegates leaning toward each other, sharing jokes at humanity's expense. She saw ancient beings who had witnessed the birth of civilizations treating her warning as entertainment one after another. They rose to speak. Some questioned humanity's technology. Others mocked their short history. Still others suggested that humans were simply too afraid of the universe to think clearly. Each speech brought more laughter, more dismissal, more contempt. Elena sat through all of it without moving. Her face remained calm even as her heart pounded with anger and frustration. She had prepared for skepticism, but this was something else entirely. This was humiliation finally, after nearly 2 hours of mockery. The High Speaker turned toward her. "Ambassador Vasquez," he said, his tone carrying the same amusement as everyone else. "Do you wish to respond to the Senate's concerns?" Elena stood slowly. The chamber quieted slightly, curious to hear what the human would say. Would she argue? Would she plead? Would she try to defend the dignity of her species with words that would only provide more material for their jokes? She looked across the assembly, meeting the eyes of every delegate who had spoken. She saw Crichton's compound gaze, the Thesan's liquid features, the swirling mass of the Marine collective. She saw beings who had decided long before she arrived that humans had nothing valuable to say. Elena gathered her data tablets. She straightened her jacket. She took a slow breath and then, without a single word, Ambassador Elena Vasquez turned and walked out of the Senate chamber. The door sealed behind her with a soft hiss, cutting off the sound of confused murmuring. She walked through the crystal corridors with her head high and her pace steady. Ignoring the protocol officers who called after her, David caught up with her at the landing platform. Breathless and worried, "Ambassador, what happened? What are we doing?" Elena did not slow down. She boarded the shuttle and began powering up the systems. "We are leaving," she said. "But the vote, the proposal, we cannot just—" "David," Elena interrupted, her voice quiet but firm. They were never going to listen. Not today, not tomorrow, not ever. We gave them our warning, and they chose to laugh. She initiated the launch sequence, and the shuttle rose from the crystal platform. "So what do we do now?" David asked. Elena looked out at the ancient city falling away below them, at the world that had witnessed 12,000 years of galactic politics, at the Senate that had dismissed humanity as frightened children. "We go home," she said, "and we prepare for what is coming. If they will not stand with us, then we will stand alone." The shuttle broke through the orange clouds and climbed toward the stars. Behind them, in the Senate chamber, the laughter continued, louder than ever. The human had run away, they said, too embarrassed to even defend herself. What more proof did anyone need that humanity was not ready for the galactic stage? They laughed for a long time, never noticing that Elena Vasquez had taken her data with her, never realizing that her silence had been a message they were too arrogant to read. By the time they understood what that silence meant, it would be far too late. 3 days after Ambassador Vasquez walked out of the Senate chamber, the human embassy on Thesan Prime went dark. The lights turned off, the communication system shut down, and the staff disappeared without a word to anyone. Counselor Veth was sent to investigate. He stood before the sealed doors and tried every diplomatic code he knew, but nothing worked. The building sat silent and empty, a dark spot in the glowing city. "They have left," he reported to the high speaker. "The entire delegation departed on a transport ship yesterday. They did not file a flight plan or inform anyone of their destination." High Speaker Alphen Voss waved a dismissive tendril. "Let them go," he said. "Perhaps some time alone will help them understand how the galaxy works. They will return when they are ready to behave like proper members of the Concord." The Senate found the situation amusing. Ambassador Crickstall made jokes about humans getting lost on their way home. The Thesan delegate suggested that humanity was throwing a tantrum like spoiled children. Laughter echoed through the halls whenever the topic came up, but as days turned into weeks, the laughter began to fade. The first sign came from the trade routes. Human merchant vessels, which had become a common sight throughout Concord space over the past 6 years, stopped appearing. Shipping companies sent inquiries to Earth and received no response. Contracts went unfulfilled, and cargo sat waiting in ports across a dozen worlds. Minor inconvenience, the Marian Collective declared. "We can find other suppliers." But finding other suppliers proved more difficult than expected. Humans had quietly filled gaps in the galactic economy that no one had noticed until they were gone. They traded in goods that other species considered beneath their attention, but those goods turned out to be more important than anyone realized. Then the scientific missions began to collapse. Joint research projects discovered that their human colleagues had departed without warning. Data shared with human scientists was suddenly inaccessible. Experiments that depended on human participation ground to a halt. "This is petty," a Dravoshi researcher complained. "They are sabotaging years of work over wounded pride." But the humans had not sabotaged anything. They had simply taken what was theirs and left. The problem was that no one had noticed how much of the collaborative work had depended on human contribution. Most troubling discovery came 3 weeks after the embassy closed. The quantum communication relays along the outer rim went offline one by one, spreading darkness across the edge of known space. These relays had been installed by human engineers during the early years of Earth's membership. They were considered a minor contribution at the time, a small gift from a young species eager to prove its worth. No one had paid much attention to them now. With the relay silent, the Senate learned exactly how much they had come to depend on human technology. Entire sectors lost contact with the core worlds. Military patrols could not communicate with their bases. Emergency signals went unheard. "This is unacceptable," High Speaker Alphen Voss declared. "We must demand that humanity restore these systems immediately." He tried to contact Earth directly, using every diplomatic channel available. For 2 days, there was nothing but silence. Then, finally, a response arrived. It was not from Ambassador Vasquez or any human diplomat. It was an automated message, cold and impersonal. "The people of Earth thank the Galactic Concord for clarifying our relationship. We will handle our own affairs. This channel will not be monitored for further communications." The message ended, and silence returned. Adolphin Voss stared at the empty screen for a long moment. Around him, his advisors exchanged worried glances. This was not the behavior of a species throwing a tantrum. This was something else. Entirely reports continued to arrive over the following weeks, each one more concerning than the last. Human military assets, modest by galactic standards, but strategically positioned throughout Concord space, had withdrawn to Earth's territory. Observation posts went dark. Patrol routes were abandoned. Defense agreements were not renewed. Most alarming of all, the humans had pulled back from the border regions that Ambassador Vasquez had warned about. The very sectors where she claimed a threat was approaching were now left unguarded, stripped of human presence. What are they doing? The Thesan delegate wondered aloud during a Senate session. If they truly believe something is coming, why would they abandon those positions? No one had an answer. The humans were not communicating, not negotiating, not making demands. They were simply gone, as if they had decided that the Galactic Concord no longer existed. Ambassador Crystal tried to dismiss the concern. "They are bluffing," he insisted. "This is a negotiating tactic. They want us to come begging for their return. We should not give them the satisfaction." But others were not so certain. A young Velkari diplomat named Siren had been assigned to study humanity before their embassy closed. She had spent months learning about human history and culture, and what she saw now worried her deeply. "Humans do not bluff like this," she told the High Speaker privately. "When they withdraw, it means they have given up on diplomacy. They are preparing for something." Preparing for what? Alphen Voss asked. Siren hesitated before answering. "For whatever comes next," she said. "They tried to warn us, and we laughed at them. Now they are acting as if we are already lost." The High Speaker dismissed her concerns, but her words stayed with him. He remembered the look on Ambassador Vasquez's face before she left, that calm expression that had seemed like weakness at the time. Now he wondered if it had been something else entirely. Perhaps it had been pity. 3 weeks of silence passed. The Senate continued to meet, continued to debate, continued to function as it always had. But something had changed. There was an unease in the air that no one wanted to acknowledge. The humans were gone, and they had taken something with them. Not just technology or trade or diplomatic presence, but something harder to define. Perhaps it was the illusion that the Galactic Concord was as strong as it believed itself to be late at night, when the Senate halls were empty. High Speaker Alphen Voss sometimes found himself looking at the data Ambassador Vasquez had left behind. The sensor readings, the trajectory calculations, the warnings that everyone had dismissed. He did not believe in the threat she described. He could not allow himself to believe it. Because if she was right, then everything that had happened in that Senate chamber was not just rude or unkind. It was catastrophic. He deleted the files and went to sleep, telling himself that the humans were wrong, that they had always been wrong, that the galaxy was safe and would remain safe forever, somewhere in the darkness between galaxies. Something continued to move, drawing closer with every passing hour, and the Galactic Concord slept peacefully. unaware that its time of peace was about to end. The attack came without warning on a quiet morning in the outer territories, exactly where Ambassador Vasquez had predicted it would station. Thora 7 was a mining outpost on the edge of Dravoshi space. 300 workers lived there, extracting rare minerals from asteroids and sending shipments back to the homeworld. It was boring work in a boring place, far from anything important. The station commander was eating breakfast when the alarms began. She dropped her food and ran to the control room, demanding answers from her confused staff, unknown contacts. A technician reported, his voice shaking. 17 of them. They came out of nowhere. Our sensors did not detect them until they were already here. The commander looked at the display and felt her blood turn cold. The shapes on the screen were unlike anything in the Concord database. They were massive, twisted things that seemed to shift and change even as she watched. They moved with a speed that should have been impossible for objects their size. Raise shields, she ordered, and send a distress signal. Get me a connection to the homeworld, but there was no time. The first attack struck before her crew could react. Something hit the station with tremendous force, tearing through the hull like paper. Screams filled the air as atmosphere vented into space. The commander never finished her distress call. Station Vera 7 went silent in less than 4 minutes. 16 more stations fell that day. The attackers swept through the outer territories like a wildfire, consuming everything in their path. They did not communicate, did not negotiate, did not respond to any signal. They simply destroyed reports flooded into the Senate chamber on Thesan Prime, each one more terrible than the last. High Speaker Alfin Voss stood at his podium, his bioluminescent form flickering with distress as he tried to make sense of the chaos. We have confirmed attacks on multiple sectors, his aide reported. The Dravoshi have lost 17 outposts. The Marian Collective has lost 2 battle fleets. The Thesan border regions are under assault. Casualties are in the tens of thousands and rising. Ambassador Cricksdale was present, his compound eyes wide with shock. The same voice that had mocked humanity weeks ago now trembled with fear. What are they? He demanded. Where did they come from? The answer came from a young analyst who had finally matched the sensor data with existing records. They matched the readings Ambassador Vasquez showed us. She said quietly, the trajectory, the signatures, everything. She was right. She was right about all of it. Silence fell over the chamber. For a long moment, no one moved. They were thinking about the laughter, the jokes, the dismissal. They were thinking about the human ambassador who had tried to warn them and received only mockery in return. We must contact Earth, High Speaker Alfin Voss declared. We need their help. The communication was sent immediately. A formal request for military assistance under the terms of the Galactic Concord Charter. It was the most desperate message the Senate had ever transmitted, admitting weakness to a species they had humiliated. 4 days passed without response. During those 4 days, 3 more worlds fell. The attackers, which scientists had begun calling the Void Swarm, seemed unstoppable. They consumed resources, technology, and organic matter with equal hunger. They stripped planets bare and moved on to the next target when Earth's response finally came. It was not from any diplomat. Every screen in the Senate chamber activated simultaneously, showing a human face that none of them recognized. He was an older man with gray hair and hard eyes, wearing a military uniform covered in medals and insignia. I am Admiral Chen Wei of the United Earth Defense Force, he said, his voice flat and cold. We received your warning about the incursion. Our condolences for your losses. High Speaker Alfin Voss leaned forward, hope flickering in his ancient eyes. Admiral, we are grateful for your response. We request immediate military assistance. Our forces are overwhelmed, and we need... You received our warning? A Thesan delegate interrupted, confusion in his voice. We sent no warning. We sent a request for help. Admiral Chun's expression did not change. Ambassador Vasquez's data was quite thorough, he said. We began preparing the moment she returned to Earth. That was 2 months ago. The Senate chamber fell silent as the implications sank in. While they had been laughing and joking, while they had been dismissing humanity as frightened children, the humans had been building weapons and training soldiers and preparing for a war they knew was coming. You knew. Ambassador Crystal whispered. You knew this would happen, and you did not help us prepare. We tried to help you prepare, Admiral Chum replied. And there was something terrible in his calm voice. Your Senate made its position clear. Humanity was too young, too primitive, too afraid to understand the universe. We accepted your judgment and made our own arrangements. The view screen behind him showed a viewport, and through that viewport, the Senate could see what humanity had been building. Ship after ship after ship, a fleet of vessels unlike anything the galaxy had seen. They were not elegant or beautiful like Concorde warships. They were brutal, efficient machines designed for one purpose only: to kill. Earth will defend its borders. Admiral Chen continued. We suggest you do the same. This channel will remain open for tactical coordination if you choose to participate. Otherwise, we wish you luck. Wait, High Speaker Alton Voss called out. Please. We made a mistake. We should have listened. But surely you will not abandon us now. Billions of lives are at stake. Admiral Chun was quiet for a moment. When he spoke again, his voice was softer, but no less cold. Ambassador Vasquez stood before your Senate and begged for your help. She presented evidence that should have convinced anyone with eyes to see. And your response was to mock her, to mock humanity, to mock the very idea that we might have something valuable to say. He leaned closer to the screen. We are not abandoning you. We never had the chance to stand with you, because you never wanted us there. But we will fight this enemy, and we will win. Because that is what humans do. We survive. The transmission ended. The Senate sat in stunned silence. Around them, the war continued to rage. More reports of death and destruction poured in. And somewhere on the edge of known space, a human fleet was moving into position. Ready to face the darkness alone, High Speaker Alton Voss looked at the empty screen and finally understood what Ambassador Vasquez's silence had meant. It had not been surrender or embarrassment or wounded pride. It had been a goodbye. And now, as the galaxy burned around them, the eldest civilizations in known space would have to learn a lesson they should have learned long ago: that wisdom does not come from age, and strength does not come from pride, and sometimes the youngest voice in the room is the only one worth hearing. The war lasted 11 months, and it changed everything the galaxy believed about itself in the beginning. Humanity fought alone. Admiral Chun's fleet held a defensive line at the edge of Earth space, and the Void Swarm crashed against it like waves against a cliff. The human ships were smaller and less advanced than the enemy, but they fought with a fury that shocked every observer. The Concorde species watched from a distance, struggling to mobilize forces that had not seen real combat in centuries. Their beautiful warships, designed for elegance and tradition, fell apart against an enemy that did not care about honor or ceremony. Their tactics, perfected over thousands of years, proved useless against creatures that had no fear and no mercy. But the humans did not break. They adapted, improvised, and found ways to hurt an enemy that should have been unstoppable. They used weapons that the Concorde considered barbaric, strategies that violated every rule of civilized warfare, and a willingness to sacrifice that bordered on madness. They fight like they have nothing to lose, a Thesan commander observed after watching a human destroyer ram itself into a Void Swarm carrier, destroying both vessels in a blinding explosion. No, they fight like they have everything to lose and have accepted the cost of saving it. Slowly, the other species began to learn. They studied human tactics and copied them. They abandoned their elegant traditions and embraced brutal efficiency. They fought alongside human squadrons and discovered that these young primitives knew more about war than civilizations 10,000 years there. Senior Ambassador Crickstal commanded a Dravoshi battle group that served beside human forces for 3 months. He had been one of the loudest voices mocking humanity in the Senate, and now he watched human pilots die protecting Dravoshi civilians on a world that was not their own. Why? He asked a human captain after a particularly brutal engagement. We treated you terribly. We laughed at you. We ignored your warnings. Why are you dying for us? The captain, a young woman with burns covering half her face, looked at him with tired eyes. Because someone has to, she said simply. And we were never fighting for your approval. We were fighting because it was right. The tide began to turn 6 months into the war. The void swarm was vast but not infinite, and humanity's relentless aggression had cost them dearly. Species that had been enemies for millennia united under human leadership, following strategies designed by the minds that had nearly destroyed Earth with nuclear fire and then rebuilt it from the ashes. Admiral Chun became a legend. His name spoken with respect by beings who had once dismissed his entire species as children. Ambassador Vasquez worked tirelessly behind the lines, coordinating refugee evacuations from worlds whose representatives had mocked her. She saved millions of lives and never once reminded anyone of what had happened in the Senate chamber. Final battle took place at the edge of the void itself, where the last of the swarm had gathered for a desperate counterattack. 300 ships from a dozen species faced them, led by a human dreadnought called the Defiance. The fighting lasted 18 hours. When it was over, the swarm was broken, scattered into fragments that would trouble the galaxy. No more Elena Vasquez watched the victory celebrations from a quiet observation deck on Thesan Prime. She had returned to the world that had witnessed her humiliation, invited back by a Senate that desperately wanted to make amends. She wore the same simple uniform she had worn on that day, and she looked older than her years. David Chan found her there, staring at the stars. The High Speaker is asking for you, he said. They want to begin the ceremony. Elena nodded but did not move. Do you remember what I said when we left this place? She asked. You said we would stand alone if we had to, David replied. I was wrong. Elena said quietly. We did stand alone for a while, but not forever. They learned eventually. They changed. I did not think that was possible. She turned to face him, and there was something in her eyes that might have been hope. Maybe that is the real lesson, she said. Not that humans are strong or brave or stubborn, but that anyone can learn, anyone can change, if the price of staying the same is high enough. They walked together to the Senate chamber, which was fuller than Elena had ever seen it. Every species in the Concord had sent representatives, and they rose to their feet as she entered. A gesture of respect that would have been unthinkable a year ago. High Speaker Alfin Voss approached her, his bioluminescent form dim with shame and gratitude. We owe Earth an apology, he said, his voice carrying to every corner of the vast room, and a debt beyond measure. We were arrogant and blind, and our arrogance nearly cost us everything. We are sorry, Ambassador Vasquez. We are truly, deeply sorry. Elena looked at the assembly, at the faces of beings who had laughed at her, who had dismissed her warnings, who had watched their worlds burn before they finally understood. She saw Ambassador Crickstal, scarred from battles he had fought alongside humans. She saw the Thesan delegate, who had lost family to the swarm. She saw ancient creatures humbled by their own mistakes. Humanity did not fight for apologies. She said quietly, we fought because the threat was real and someone had to. We would have fought even if you never understood. We would have died even if you never changed. She paused, letting the words sink in. But you did change. And that matters more than any apology. She placed a data chip on the speaking podium, and the room fell silent. This contains intelligence on 3 additional void signatures detected at the galactic edge. Our analysts estimate arrival within 15 years. They may be remnants of the swarm, or they may be something new. We do not know yet. She straightened her jacket, the same gesture she had made before walking out of this chamber a year ago. Earth will be preparing. We have already begun. You may do as you wish. She turned toward the exit, her footsteps echoing in the silence. At the door, she stopped and looked back at the assembly. But this time, Ambassador Elena Vasquez said, without anger or pride or satisfaction, "Perhaps you will listen." She walked out, and the Senate did not laugh instead. They began to plan the war, had taught them many things. But the most important lesson was the simplest, that strength is not measured in years or technology or tradition. It is measured in the willingness to face the darkness when everyone else looks away, and humanity, young and primitive and scarred by their own history, had faced the darkness without flinching. The galaxy would not forget. The galaxy would not make the same mistake again, and somewhere in the void between stars. Elena Vasquez smiled, because she finally believed that was true.